People always think they know right from wrong, yet human behavior is full of contradictions, because we are quick to judge others while forgiving ourselves. And this truth slowly revealed itself through the life of a young man named Samir, who was known among his friends as smart, polite, and confident, yet inside he often struggled with his own mistakes. And he realized that while he could criticize his classmates for small faults or gossip about someone's careless behavior, he rarely held himself accountable in the same way. And this pattern became obvious one day when a minor misunderstanding in class escalated into a conflict, and Samir noticed how quickly people blamed each other, pointing fingers, judging without knowing the full story, while privately, each person made excuses for their own mistakes, and the injustice of it struck him deeply, because he too had been guilty of similar behavior countless times, yet always allowed himself the comfort of excuses, rationalizations, and forgetfulness, convincing himself that his intentions made him better than others, and that small mistakes did not count, while the same mistakes in others seemed enormous, unfair, and unforgivable. And Samir began observing more closely how human psychology works in these moments, how social conditioning, ego, and fear of criticism train people to judge others harshly, while their own errors are hidden behind a veil of self-justification. And he noticed this in friends who would laugh at someone else's failure but privately panic when facing their own, and in teachers who demanded perfection from students while ignoring their own biases, and in families where parents criticized children for trivial issues but overlooked their own flaws. And Samir realized that this is not accidental, but a deeply ingrained part of human behavior, because our brain is wired to protect self-image, to maintain pride, and to avoid guilt, and the easiest way to do that is by finding faults in others while forgiving oneself. And that thought unsettled him, forcing him to reflect on his own habits, noticing how many times he would internally scold someone for being careless, dishonest, or lazy, but excuse the exact same behavior in himself. And he remembered moments when he had broken rules, lied, or failed to help, yet his conscience let him off lightly, justifying his behavior with reasons that would never occur to him for others. And this duality fascinated him. The human tendency to judge outwardly while forgiving inwardly, and he wondered why people never seemed to notice this, why societies reward criticism more than self-reflection, and why human empathy often fails when applied to oneself. And as the days went by, Samir began experimenting with this awareness, observing every situation, noticing how quickly judgment arose in others, and how easily excuses arose within. And he realized that change begins with awareness, that understanding human behavior is the first step toward breaking the cycle, and he decided to test himself, challenging his natural tendency to excuse his own faults by consciously reflecting on mistakes he made, admitting them silently to himself, and resisting the urge to blame someone else. And the first time he did this, a small act of honesty with himself brought a strange feeling of relief, and he noticed how lighter he felt, not in the eyes of others, but internally, because he had acknowledged his own error, rather than hiding behind judgment. And that moment marked the beginning of a journey of understanding human hypocrisy, empathy, and the inner struggle between self-judgment and forgiveness. And as Samir continued, he realized that human behavior is not just about morality or ethics externally, but about internal honesty, the ability to see oneself clearly while noticing the same faults in others without bias. And that awareness is rare, because society rarely encourages people to hold themselves accountable as rigorously as they hold others accountable. And that realization haunted him while also motivating him to explore further, seeking deeper understanding. And that curiosity about human behavior became a personal mission, a story that would slowly unfold in his life. revealing lessons that most people ignore but that define character, empathy, and true morality, and it was only the beginning of Samir's journey to understanding why humans judge others but forgive themselves. As Samir continued observing human behavior, he realized that the world is filled with people who silently battle their own contradictions, constantly judging others while forgiving themselves, and the more he paid attention, the more he saw this pattern everywhere, from classmates who mocked others for minor mistakes but hid their own failures, to adults who criticized publicly yet quietly ignored their own errors, and this constant duality fascinated him, because it revealed a hidden truth. Humans are often unaware of the hypocrisy within themselves, and the act of judging others is a defense mechanism, a way to maintain self-esteem while protecting one's fragile sense of morality, and Samir began experimenting with this realization in his own life, noticing every time he felt the urge to blame someone else, every time he wanted to criticize a peer or point out a flaw. And each time he paused, reflecting on his own mistakes first, he discovered that awareness itself brought clarity and an inner sense of peace, unlike the fleeting satisfaction of condemning others. And he started to document these experiences in his mind, observing friends, family, and strangers, noticing how small situations exposed massive differences between how people treat themselves and how they treat others. And he recalled moments when he had lied, cheated, or been selfish, yet his conscience offered him excuses. Yet when someone else made the same mistake, he felt the need to judge harshly. And understanding this duality forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about society and himself, because he realized that human empathy is limited by self-perception. And until people learn to extend the same compassion to themselves that they hope to see in others, judgment will always dominate their interactions, and this insight made him rethink relationships, friendships, and social interactions, noticing how many conflicts arise not from real differences but from the imbalance between self-forgiveness and criticism of others, and he started making small conscious changes, apologizing without being asked, admitting mistakes without fear, and forgiving himself genuinely for errors, and he observed how this subtle shift changed his energy and interactions, because when he stopped blaming others for what he also allowed in himself, conversations became calmer and conflicts